Okay, so whether you are a leader interested in strategic innovation, or if you are a student or designer interested in learning how to innovate with simplicity and speed, or if you are a startup wanting to understand your value and opportunity in the marketplace, then these videos will be for you. Okay, I'm Bernard Schockman, and I'm coming to you today from my second favourite surf beach in the Gold Coast here, called Rainbow Beach. Right next to Coolangatta Beach, which is another one of the beaches you can probably see in the distance around the corner there to my right. Okay, so I promised to bring you a number of videos today on design thinking, the mindset, the philosophy, the toolkit, and specifically the area that we specialize in, which is the Billboard design thinking, which is going deep into one particular part of your traditional design thinking. Okay, so today what I'd like to talk about is where actual design thinking fits in with the realm of things when it comes to your problem space, when it comes to MVPs, lean, design sprints, a product vision, a detailed UX design and agile. So let's talk about that. Where does this jigsaw piece fit in? Okay, so let me typically just run through the way that a normal project would roll through. And this is not a traditional project. This is what we would call a project that would be a future project, or a project that would be in alignment with the way we need to deliver projects today. We need to deliver them much more rapidly and in smaller bite sizes than we ever could. So we do design thinking up front because design thinking is all the pre-design conversations we need to have with the right stakeholders or key stakeholders up front, so that we can make the right decisions and identify the right solutions in that problem or challenge space. Now, typically in design thinking, we talk about emphasize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And they tend to be the 5 stages that we go into with design thinking. And with the design, identify, and prototype, this is where we're actually going deeper into the Billboard design thinking style of workshopping that we were talking about in the previous video. Now, there were 5 parts to that workshop design as well. There was prepare, design, conduct, report, and follow up. And if you want to find out a little bit more about those in detail, go back to the previous video. Now, again, in design thinking, those 5 stages: emphasize, design, ideate, prototype, and test. When we get to the test side of things, what we're interested in doing then is we actually are talking about design sprints and lean experiments. And this is where you would have heard the terminology of a 5-day sprint come into play. So a 5-day sprint is where you will go deep into the testing side of things. You still do the emphasize, design, ideate, prototype side of design thinking, and you still go into the Billboard and go deep into what that workshop needs to be in order to produce the right solution. Then when you're in the testing side of things, this is what when we're really talking about lean experiments and design sprints. So just differentiating there between design thinking and design sprints, and the Billboard design thinking we're talking about. Okay, now typically out of a design sprint, a 5-day design sprint, you'll come out with an MVP, or a pretty good idea of what it is you are going to build, or you may have actually in fact built that in that 5-day sprint. Now the MVP leads you into 2 different spaces. Now once you as a team identify what that MVP is and you've validated that with your customers, then it could potentially be time to do an entire product vision, because I guess through the workshopping and through the design thinking and the sprint, we've identified the nugget, the MVP that we need to produce, something that's of value to our customers. The next thing to do is, well, what could the entire product look like? And that would be a product vision. When we're talking about a product vision, we're talking about what does that whole product universe look like? Now we're starting to talk about things like user stories and feature lists, depending on which way you like to work, in user stories or feature lists. The other side of the pivot, I guess, there between the MVP is the product vision. The other side of that is a detailed UX design. Now we're starting to talk about user experience, and we're starting to articulate what the design looks like in a lot of detail. So we're talking about interfaces, we're talking about interactions, we're talking about the overall experience, and going down and dirty into that experience and really articulating in detail what the flows look like. What do all these core flows look like, and what are these pages? How do these pages move from page to page? What are the interactions there with the widgets? How are users using them? How are they traversing from one experience to the next within that MVP? At that point, when we've actually identified the MVP, we've potentially looked at the entire product vision, and we've detailed out the UX design. The next thing to do is then to actually get that built. And usually what happens there, now we're starting to talk about Agile. And when we start to talk about Agile, we're talking about, there's a few different flavors of Agile. There's extreme programming, there's Kanban, there's design-driven development, and then there's Scrum. And Scrum tends to be the sort of flavor of Agile that's typically mostly used around the industry, or definitely that's what I've seen mostly used. But potentially design-driven development is another one that I think when you're talking about MVPs and user experience design and product vision, driving your development through design could be a way that is advantageous for your team, depending on how you like to work. So let's talk about Agile a little bit. With Agile, we generally talk about things like a backlog. And a backlog, think of a backlog as, we're building a car, there's a shed over there, all the product pieces are in that shed. And now the product person will determine how that backlog is going to be moved onto the production conveyor belt. And we'll call that the planning session. It's typically called a sprint planning session, where we look into the shed, we grab the boxes, and we go, yeah, they're the ones we're going to start to build out first. Once we've done our planning and we've identified the boxes we want to build, it's time to sprint. And this is typically where we actually put those pieces together. We start to develop those pieces. Once we've reached the end of that sprint, and that is typically 2 weeks, we will do what we call a retro. So we will look back on how did we do things, how did things work? And this is the continuous improvement side of Agile, where you'll continuously look back on the last 2 weeks of sprinting, what you actually developed, and you'll look at how can we improve that, how can we make that better, what did we do well, what didn't we do well, how can we improve our process. And there is only one other piece to talk about with Agile, and this is a stand-up. So on a daily basis, generally what happens in Scrum is you will do a stand-up, and everyone in that team, whether they be remote or whether they be on site, comes to that stand-up, and that might last about 15 minutes. And in that stand-up, you only talk about 3 things. You talk about what I did yesterday, what I'm doing today, and what's holding me up. And anything else that happens outside those conversations actually happens outside the Agile Scrum stand-up. So I might break off with another person and talk about a difficulty I'm having, and they might have a piece that can help me solve that difficulty. So we've talked about the problem space, we've talked about design thinking and where that fits in, we've talked about design sprints, we've talked about lean experiments, MVP, Agile, the entire product vision, UX design. So specifically what I wanted to talk about was where design thinking fits in here, and that fits in up front in this process. Again, the pre-design conversations that need to happen around a problem space. Why are we designing or developing something? Why are we creating something here? And why are we creating it this way? We've gone into organizations, corporate organizations across every single vertical, and gone in and done problem, design thinking around a problem. We've done product vision, articulating what that product vision would look like, design sprints, articulating an MVP, looking at a detailed UX design, and actually even going in and helping them understand what this whole process could look like for them as an end-to-end process. So that's what I want to talk about today. Tomorrow I'll be talking about something altogether different.